I drive a taxi on the long, empty roads of rural Texas, and the rules are the only things keeping me alive. Some nights, I swear, the desert stretches forever, the horizon a thin, trembling line where the sky and the ground meet in silence. It's the kind of night that makes every creak of the cab, every whisper of wind through the mesquite, feel like it could be watching you. I've learned to listen, to notice the small things, the way the headlights of a distant truck wobble on the cracked asphalt, the faint scuff of animal feet on the roadside, even the ghostly glimmer of old fence posts that seem to lean just a little too close to the road. Tonight, the highways are endless ribbons of dark, and I'm alone, except for the hum of the radio, barely louder than a whisper. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, a hollow, echoing sound that seems to bounce across the empty plains. Headlights appear and vanish in the far distance like slow-moving fireflies. Dark shapes flicker just at the edge of my vision. Maybe trees, maybe something else. I keep my eyes forward, but I feel them, those shapes, the watching presence. The rules came to me long before I ever drove a single mile in Pecos County. Older drivers whispered them, each more peculiar than the last. Never pick up a passenger after midnight on the back roads, one said, voice low, as if even saying it aloud could draw attention. Always keep your doors locked on certain roads, no matter how friendly they seem. They didn't explain why, and you learn quickly that some things are meant to be obeyed without question. My first call tonight crackles over the dispatcher's radio. The voice is almost familiar, soft, oddly echoing, like it's coming from somewhere deep inside my cab. I pause, remembering the warning from my mentor, a veteran driver with lines etched deep across his face. Never trust a voice that calls alone on the road. Never. I hesitate, hand hovering over the door lock, heart tightening in the quiet. The cab hums, the wind outside stirring the dry brush, and I know, even now, that tonight the rules will be tested. One wrong move, one ignored guideline, and this lonely highway could become something I might never leave. The unease settles into my chest, a cold weight, curiosity and dread mixing into a tension that grows with every mile. And so, I drive, listening, waiting, knowing the night is watching me as much as I am watching it. The roads out here in rural Texas aren't roads so much as thin veins of asphalt stretching across the desert, connecting towns that barely have names. For miles, it's nothing but mesquite and abandoned farmhouses, their weathered boards rattling in the wind like dry bones. Sometimes you pass a gas station with flickering neon that died decades ago, its pumps rusted, the windows dark and hollow. Night shifts are long and empty, punctuated only by the occasional headlights of a passing truck or the sudden unsettling sensation that something is moving just at the edge of the cab's headlights. I drive this stretch every night, taximeter running, seatbelt snug, my hands gripping the wheel, and the radio quietly humming old country songs in the background. My job is simple in theory. Pick up locals, drop them off, occasionally ferry a stranger through the darkness. But the simplicity is deceptive. Each shift comes with responsibility that goes beyond the usual. I report strange occurrences, maintain the cab as my safe space, and follow the unspoken rules of these roads, rules handed down by the drivers who came before me. There's a reason the older men in the county never stop by the diner to chat after midnight. They know what lingers here when the lights go out. I learned early on that every town has its character. My mentor, a grizzled driver named Hank, taught me more than driving techniques. He taught me how to notice the anomalies. Abandoned vehicles hidden in gravel lots. Roadside crosses that glow faintly even without a bulb. Shrines with plastic flowers and weathered photographs that seem freshly placed. And then there are the locals. Cryptic, wary, sometimes outright strange, who hint at happenings no one else talks about. Dispatcher voices come over the radio too, calm and distant, but you catch a subtle edge in their tone, as if they know something you don't. Some nights, the back roads are littered with ghosts of stories that never quite make sense. Locals whisper about disappearances, people who drove down the wrong stretch, never to be seen again. They speak of figures glimpsed at curves in the road, vanishing as quickly as they appear. On one of my first nights, I saw it for myself. A flickering roadside cross, its paint peeling, illuminated by my headlights. A figure stood at the curve just beyond it, tall and still. I slowed instinctively, heart tightening. But as the car drew nearer, the figure was gone, as if the road itself had swallowed it whole. Even in moments that should feel ordinary, dropping someone off at a motel, refueling at a darkened station, the air feels thick. The desert is alive at night in ways you don't see in daylight. Wind rustles through the mesquite in patterns that almost sound like whispers. Shadows lean a little too close, seeming to stretch with an intent of their own. It's a quiet tension that never fully goes away. A reminder that these roads are not just empty stretches of asphalt. They are corridors to something unseen, and I'm only ever as safe as the rules allow me to be. Every mile, every turn reinforces the lesson Hank drilled into me. Out here, you drive carefully, you observe, and above all, you follow the rules. Because the night doesn't forgive mistakes and the roads don't forget. The first rule was simple, but the first time I understood its weight, it nearly changed everything. My dispatcher's voice came over the radio, calm, professional, almost mundane. We have a stranded traveler near mile marker 42 outside the old McAllister farm. Can you check it out? I froze for a moment, hand on the gear shift, feeling the chill of the empty Texas night seep into the cab. I knew that road. It was one of the stretches they whispered about, the back road no one should drive alone after midnight. Stories of drivers who had vanished there, never to be seen again, lingered in my mind. Hank, my mentor, had told me once, if the radio calls you out there after dark, you don't go. You do not. The night doesn't care about good intentions. I hesitated, fingers tightening on the steering wheel. Then I followed the protocol. I ignored the call, sent the notification back to dispatch, and drove on. Almost immediately, the darkness seemed to press closer. The headlights of my cab glinted off the mesquite, catching something moving at the edge of the road. A silhouette. Tall, thin, standing perfectly still. The wind whispered, carrying a voice, or maybe voices, softly calling my name. It was distant, almost coaxing, and yet it made my chest tighten. I told myself it was the rustling branches, the emptiness playing tricks, but my gut didn't buy it. I remembered the stories, the drivers who had picked up friendly passengers and never returned. The whispered warnings weren't superstition. They were survival instructions. A vehicle approached in the distance. Its headlights cut through the black like knives, swinging slightly as if the driver, or whatever it was, didn't know the road. The silhouette shifted, moving along the roadside, almost keeping pace with the light. I kept my foot steady on the gas, keeping a careful distance, refusing to acknowledge it, refusing to break the rule. The air seemed to thicken, the whispers growing faintly louder, almost like they were forming words I should understand. I could feel my heart hammering, my breath shallow, the night stretching longer than it had any right to. Every instinct screamed to turn around, to check, to stop, but the rule was clear. As I drove past the curve near the abandoned farm, the figure vanished. The whispering stopped. The road opened back into the familiar stretches of mesquite and moonlight. Relief washed over me, but beneath it, a new understanding had settled. This was no mere precaution. Rules weren't suggestions. They were shields against the things that lurked beyond the headlights, the things that waited patiently for someone foolish enough to ignore them. That night, I understood clearly. Every rule had a reason, and following them wasn't about fear. It was about survival. The second rule became personal almost immediately. A lesson learned, not from stories, but from the tangible brush with danger that left my hands shaking long after the engine cooled. It started with a call from dispatch, a location just off the old ranch road near the abandoned silos. The voice on the radio gave no details, only coordinates and a time. Now, when I arrived, the night was heavy with mist, the kind that clings to the asphalt and makes headlights seem like weak lanterns against a vast darkness. A figure stood at the edge of the road, backlit by the faint glow of a distant farmhouse. At first, the shape seemed almost human, casual in posture, waiting. But there was something off in the way it shifted, the staccato motion of its hands, like it was moving to a rhythm only it could hear. As I stopped the cab and rolled the window down, the figure stepped closer, muttering words I couldn't understand. They weren't coherent, not English, maybe not any language I'd ever heard. My skin prickled. My fingers moved automatically to the door lock, clicking it shut before the stranger could reach inside. I remember the brief, awful pause. The second the door locked, the figure froze, staring at me through the glass with a tilt of the head that felt wrong, unnatural. Then it smiled, a slow, curling gesture that didn't touch the eyes. It reached again, this time pressing its hands against the window, as if testing the barrier, and I could feel the threat pressing in through the small space between us. The engine roared to life in my chest as I took a shallow breath, kept the headlights trained on the figure, and remembered Hank's voice. Doors locked, always. 1 second of hesitation, 1 second of doubt, and it's over, before you even see it coming. The figure's muttering grew louder, sharper, more insistent, but the lock held. I could see its movements becoming frantic, almost jerky, and yet it never forced the door. Eventually, the figure stepped back into the shadows and vanished, swallowed by the night that had been waiting patiently. I sat there a moment, staring at the empty road, heart hammering, realizing that the rule wasn't just about keeping someone out. It was about keeping yourself alive. The taxi, a simple metal box with weak headlights and a humming radio, had become a sanctuary. The moment I obeyed the rule, I survived. The moment I had hesitated, even slightly, could have been my last. That night, the rules shifted in my mind. They weren't superstitions handed down by paranoid old drivers. They were life-saving instructions, a fragile line between the mundane and the unspeakable dangers lurking in the empty stretches of rural Texas. From that moment on, I never questioned the rules. I followed them, because survival depended on it. And the night outside my cab doors was patient, watchful, and unforgiving. I thought I had seen it all by the third night. The isolation, the strange sounds on the empty highways, the passengers who whispered too much or too little. But rule number 3 hit me with a clarity I'll never forget. It started like any other ride. A dispatch call from the southern edge of town, a passenger needing a ride to a neighboring county. Their voice over the radio was calm, almost casual, but there was something underlined in it, a subtle insistence that made the hair at the back of my neck rise. When they stepped into the cab, I noticed immediately that they carried a heavy scent, like the wind off the mesquite mixed with something metallic, faint but unmistakable. They were polite, their words courteous, but their eyes lingered too long on the horizon, as if scanning the darkness for something only they could see. Then came the suggestion. There's a shortcut through the old ranch road. Fewer cars, faster to your destination. A shortcut in daylight would have been tempting, even efficient. But after hours of listening to Hank, the veteran driver who trained me on these night shifts, I knew better. Rule number 3 wasn't a mere guideline. It was survival. The temptation gnawed at me for a moment. The passenger's insistence was persuasive, almost hypnotic, their voice calm and soothing, yet layered with an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. Finally I gave in, thinking I could handle it. I turned the wheel toward the twisting back road, the headlights slicing through the fog, illuminating the skeletal remains of trees and abandoned fences. Almost immediately, things changed. The radio cut out mid-sentence, leaving only static. The engine sputtered like it was struggling for life. The cab lights flickered, shadows flitting across the road in ways that no animal or passing car could explain. I remembered Hank's words, "Shortcuts after dark. That's when they come out. Don't let anyone talk you into it." The passenger leaned back, a faint smile tracing their lips, and muttered, "Almost there." But the words felt wrong. They weren't reassuring. They were a warning I wasn't meant to ignore. Shapes danced at the edges of the headlights, tall, thin forms that seemed to bend and stretch unnaturally, vanishing when I tried to focus on them. The sense of being watched intensified with every turn, every mile. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. I thought about the old driver who disappeared after taking a shortcut through these roads, never seen again. The rule wasn't superstition, it was a shield, a barrier against forces I could not name. I had broken it, and now the consequences, subtle but menacing, were closing in. By the time I forced the cab back toward the main highway, the passenger was silent, eyes forward, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. My pulse still pounded, my ears attuned to every creak of the tires, every rustle in the mesquite. The road had tested me, and the lesson was clear. Detours offered after dark were never benign. Following them wasn't just foolish, it was courting the unknown. From that night on, I vowed never to let persuasion or convenience override the rules. Survival depended on adherence. The back roads of rural Texas held things I wasn't meant to see. And rule number 3 was the first line of defense against whatever lingered in the shadows, waiting for the unwary. By the 4th week of night shifts, I thought I had learned most of the lessons the back roads of rural Texas could teach me. But rule number 4 would remind me that even the familiar could turn sinister. I was driving along a stretch of highway that seemed endless. Mesquite trees clawing at the edges of the road, abandoned farmhouses standing like hollowed-out skeletons in the fog. The hum of the tires on asphalt was my only companion, and even that felt oddly loud in the thick silence. Then my phone buzzed. The screen flashed an unknown number. Normally I would have ignored it, but there was something about the way it glowed in the dark cab that drew my attention like a lure. Before I could think, the screen displayed a name I didn't recognize, but the voice that came through was eerily familiar. Soft, coaxing, almost gentle. "Take the next left. You know the one. I'll be waiting there." I froze, gripping the wheel tighter. Rule number 4 rang in my head like a bell. Do not answer the phone while driving in isolated areas. It wasn't a mere suggestion. It was a warning embedded with countless stories of vanished drivers and unexplained accidents. Yet, the voice called to a part of me I didn't fully trust. The part that wanted to understand why. I hesitated. The fog thickened, swallowing the road ahead and turning every stretch into a gray unknown. Headlights appeared in the distance, pale and brief, vanishing as quickly as they came, reflecting back like eyes staring at me. Distant sirens echoed, warped and unnatural, seeming to come from places they couldn't possibly exist. My cab's interior felt smaller, more confining, as if the fog itself was pressing against the windows. I kept my eyes on the road, thumb hovering over the phone, listening to the voice coax me forward. Each word was wrong. Familiar but off, like a dream remembered incorrectly. I recalled Hank's warning. Never engage with them. The call isn't just a call, it's a test. You answer, you follow. Sometimes you disappear. The crossroads came into view, just as the voice suggested, though the road should have taken me past it miles earlier. My heart pounded as I slowed the cab, fog curling around the tires, taunting, alive. I could feel the pull of curiosity, the almost magnetic need to see who or what waited. But the rule anchored me. I set the phone aside, refusing to respond, refusing to acknowledge the call. The fog seemed to resist, curling tighter around the vehicle, whispering in the wind through the cracked window, carrying fragments of the voice. "Why won't you come?" Shapes moved at the edges of the headlights, shadowy figures that flickered in and out, appearing to stand along the shoulder before vanishing again. My pulse raced, adrenaline mixing with the fear that these things were real, not imagination. By the time I reached the next gas station, the fog had thinned, the road straightened, and the voice was gone. My hands trembled, and my mind refused to settle. I realized then that some rules weren't about comfort. They were about survival. The phone could lure you, mislead you, even kill you if you weren't vigilant. And in those long, isolated stretches, every shadow, every sound, every ring could be a test you weren't meant to fail. From that night forward, rule number 4 became my mantra: silence over curiosity, safety over familiarity, survival over instinct. Because in the back roads of rural Texas, answering a call wasn't just dangerous, it was inviting the unknown to take the wheel. I thought I had grown accustomed to the oddities of the night, to the whispering wind along desolate back roads, and the shadowy shapes that darted at the edges of my headlights. But rule number 5 had a way of reminding me that mechanical failure could be just as dangerous as the unknown lurking outside. It was well past midnight when I rounded a curve on Highway 87, a long stretch of asphalt stretching like a ribbon through the mesquite. The cab's engine had been making a subtle, almost imperceptible shiver all evening, but I'd chalked it up to age. That complacency, I would soon realize, could have deadly consequences. Without warning, the engine coughed violently and died. The dashboard lights flickered, once, twice, and went completely dark. My heartbeat jumped into my throat as I realized the cab was dead in the middle of the highway. I reached for the gear shift, trying to coax life back into the vehicle, but it remained stubbornly silent. The night pressed in around me like a living thing, thick and suffocating. Then the headlights, the only barrier between me and the black void ahead, flickered and dimmed. Shapes began to stir in the peripheral darkness, or perhaps the darkness itself had begun to move. In the rearview mirror, I caught movement, small, rapid, and impossibly close. Shadows danced along the road behind me, and I felt a prickle of instinctual fear crawling up my spine. I remembered what Hank had told me during my first week. A working cab is more than comfort, it's your lifeline. Out here, without light and engine, the road doesn't just get dark, it becomes hungry. I had laughed at the hyperbole back then, but now laughter felt absurd. I was vulnerable, stripped of control, entirely dependent on machinery to keep me safe from whatever lingered in the black. Through the windshield, strange lights began to appear in the distance, hovering between the trees along the roadside. They didn't move like cars. They didn't even flicker naturally. I blinked, and the reflections in my mirrors shifted, there, then gone, like impossible twins of something waiting to reach me. My fingers tightened around the wheel, knuckles white. Panic buzzed in my ears, but the voice of the rule reminded me to stay calm. Without the lights, without the engine, you're a target. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed in the quiet hum of fear. I couldn't tell which was worse, the isolation or the knowledge that the shadows knew I was stranded. Finally, with trembling hands, I managed to restart the engine. Lights blinked back to life, bright and reassuring, though the night beyond remained merciless and strange. The moving shapes retreated, or perhaps they had only been waiting for my moment of weakness. As I drove on, the cab alive once more, I felt a deep, gnawing respect for the simplicity of the rule. Keep your vehicle working. Check your lights, your engine, your fuel. Because out here, any failure isn't just inconvenient, can be fatal. And every night on these empty back roads, the rules aren't arbitrary. They're survival protocols etched in experience, in whispers, in the memory of those who didn't make it home. I gripped the wheel, staring at the stretch of asphalt ahead, knowing that my life and sanity depended on obeying these instructions to the letter. Out here, there's no room for shortcuts, no margin for error. Just the hum of the tires, the glow of headlights, and the unspoken threat that failure has consequences far beyond a stalled engine. By the time I reached the far edge of Pecos County that night, the fog had rolled in thick and silent, swallowing the edges of the road and turning the horizon into a featureless gray void. My headlights cut feebly through the mist, casting long trembling beams onto the cracked asphalt, revealing nothing but twisted mesquite and the occasional abandoned fence post. I could feel the cold weight of the darkness pressing in, but something told me to stay alert. Hank's voice echoed in my mind. Never trust someone offering help after dark. You won't know if it's a guide or a predator. I was about to dismiss it as an old driver's paranoia when a figure appeared on the roadside. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker, a desperate traveler seeking a ride. The shape was tall, cloaked in shadow, and their face obscured by the fog. They raised a hand in a casual wave, and their voice carried unnaturally, stretched and hollow. You're heading the wrong way. There's a safer road just ahead. Every instinct screamed to ignore them. The cab's engine hummed, but I felt a subtle resistance, like the vehicle itself was warning me. The fog seemed to thicken instantly around the figure, curling and swirling unnaturally, and my headlights flickered. I considered following the direction. They sounded so convincing, almost familiar, but the memory of every vanished driver who had trusted a stranger at night pulled me back. I hesitated. My fingers hovered over the gear shift, my foot on the brake, and I forced myself to breathe. That hesitation saved me. The moment I considered turning toward the safe road, the engine shuddered and cut out, leaving me in near total darkness. Panic surged, but I kept my eyes on the figure. Their hand lifted again, beckoning more insistently, and a low whisper floated on the fog, almost like my own name, drawn out and urgent. I realized then what Hank had meant. This wasn't a person. It was an entity, or perhaps a trap, using familiarity and guidance to lure drivers into vulnerability. Any step I had taken toward them would have been fatal. My mind raced, trying to reconcile logic and instinct. I waited, breath shallow, and when the figure moved closer, the fog thickened like smoke, their outline twisting into something impossible. My skin crawled as shadows stretched unnaturally along the roadside, feeding on my hesitation. Finally, the figure's voice broke into fragmented words, almost pleading, almost mocking. I forced myself to start the engine again. The cab roared to life, lights steady, mirrors reflecting only the empty road behind me. When I glanced again, the figure had vanished. No footprints, no trace, as if the fog had swallowed it whole. As I pressed on, the road winding back to the familiar stretches of highway, I felt the full weight of rule number 6. The rules weren't suggestions. They were survival mechanisms, each one a lifeline against forces that preyed on the unwary. That night, the lesson was clear. In the dark, no offer of help is genuine. Any stranger could be a phantom, a trap, or something worse, and hesitation, guided by knowledge and respect for the rules, is often the only thing standing between life and the unknown. I gripped the wheel tightly, headlights cutting through the mist once more, heart pounding, knowing that every curve of the highway, every shadowed figure could test me again, and that the rules were the only things keeping me alive. By the time I reached the twisting back roads near the edge of Pecos County, the night had fully claimed the land. Fog crawled across the asphalt like slow, living smoke, swallowing the edges of the road and turning even familiar landmarks into vague shapes. My headlights struggled against the thickening haze, and the hum of the engine seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. Every instinct whispered. This was the moment the rules had prepared me for. It started subtly, as these things always do. Shadows flitted at the periphery of my vision, long and contorted, never fully stepping into the light. Then the radio, which had been a dull companion all night, erupted with voices, fragmented, overlapping, some almost whispering my name. I tightened my grip on the wheel, remembering every rule I'd been forced to learn. Never pick up passengers after midnight on certain back roads. Lock the doors. Avoid detours suggested by others. Never answer the phone. Maintain the car. And never trust someone offering help after dark. I felt the first real surge of panic when the cab shuddered, the headlights flickering violently before dying completely. I was plunged into darkness, the road ahead invisible, except for the brief glints of passing reflective signs. And then they appeared. Passengers, or what seemed like passengers, materializing inside the cab from nowhere. One in the back seat, another leaning in through the passenger window, their faces pale, expressionless, eyes unnervingly familiar yet distorted. Like memories I couldn't place, I whispered the rules under my breath, trying to will them into reality, as if reciting a mantra could hold the chaos at bay. Hands shaking, I fumbled to restart the engine, willing it to roar back to life. The dashboard lit up for a moment, and I saw a flicker in the rearview mirror, a shadow twisting unnaturally, stretching across the cab, as if the very space inside was bending. A sudden swerve brought me inches from a roadside tree. My foot slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the asphalt. But the fog seemed to close in, the road shifting beneath me like a living thing. One of the figures leaned forward, whispering again, a voice that sounded like someone I'd once known, calling me toward the abandoned town just ahead. I remembered rule number 3, never take detours suggested by passengers after dark, and forced the wheel back onto the main stretch, heart hammering. The radio burst again, overlapping chatter, distorted sirens, fragmented words and multiple voices, impossible to parse. My headlights flickered on and off, revealing glimpses of broken vehicles on the roadside, long-forgotten shrines, and shadows that seemed to move independent of anything physical. The cab's engine faltered, sputtering just as one of the backseat figures extended an impossibly long arm toward the ignition. My breath caught in my throat, and I slammed the gear into drive, praying to reach solid pavement. Every turn, every rule collided in that moment. The fog thickened, the shadows multiplied, and I could hear the wind carrying whispers from multiple directions, overlapping cries and laughter that didn't belong to any living person. My hands moved almost automatically, repeating the survival steps, locking doors, ignoring voices, keeping the engine running, refusing detours. Panic threatened to consume me, but the rules, hard, unyielding, ancient as the roads themselves, were my anchor. At the peak of the chaos, the cab hit a patch of slick road. The backseat passenger's face distorted in the dim light, mouth stretching impossibly, eyes rolling into shadows. For a second, I felt certain I was going to die. But I didn't. I remembered rule number 6. Never trust someone offering help after dark. I refused to follow the beckoning figure at the crossroads, kept my path straight, and whispered the rules like a protective charm. The shadows hesitated, the fog seemed to recoil, and with a shudder, the engine steadied. Minutes passed, or hours, I couldn't tell, and gradually the figures dissolved, the fog thinned, and the road returned to something tangible, something familiar. I was breathing hard, knuckles white on the wheel, but alive. The rules had guided me through the impossible, each one a lifeline through a gauntlet of supernatural threats. And though I was exhausted, trembling, I understood now more than ever. The rules were not suggestions. They were survival, etched into every back road, every abandoned farm, every shadow that lingered just beyond the headlights. As the first hints of dawn glimmered faintly on the horizon, I continued down the road, eyes wide, senses taut. Every whisper, Every shadow, every echo of that night was still with me. I had survived, but I knew it was only temporary. The rules lurked, for now. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, the next test waited. Dawn arrived slowly, spilling pale light over the endless Texas plains. The horizon glowed a weak amber, softening the sharp edges of the night, yet the world didn't feel entirely restored. As I drove along the familiar highway, the cab seemed almost ordinary. But closer inspection told a different story. There were scratches along the side, shallow but deliberate, as if some unseen hand had traced its way along the doors. Items I had left on the passenger seat were gone, vanished without a trace. And in the dust on the shoulder, tire tracks appeared where none should have been, curved, inconsistent, overlapping with mine, yet belonging to nothing I could identify. I gripped the wheel tighter, feeling the residual tension of the night still coiling through my body. My hands shook slightly, though the motion was almost imperceptible. Every shadow, every whisper, every warning from the rules played back in my mind in slow, vivid detail. The events of the night had been a gauntlet of fear, but somehow, following the rules, every strict, impossible-sounding guideline had kept me alive. My phone buzzed, and the dispatcher's voice crackled over the line. "You followed the rules, right?" There was no accusation in the tone, only the weight of shared understanding, the kind of communication built from experience and hard-earned survival. I exhaled, relief washing over me in waves, though it was laced with an unshakable tension. I nodded to myself, even though no one could see it, murmuring a quiet affirmation. Yes, I followed the rules, yet the relief was temporary. My chest tightened as I considered the implication. The rules were not static. They would continue to evolve, as subtle as the fog that rolls across these back roads, as insistent as the whispers carried on the wind. Tonight had taught me their necessity, but also their unpredictability. I had survived, but only by the narrowest margin, and only by obeying what I now understood were survival laws, not mere superstition. As I rounded the final bend leading back toward town, I glanced at the crossroads where so much of the night's chaos had converged. The morning haze softened the landscape, yet even in that softened light I saw it, a shadow slipping between the edges of the road, dissolving as if it had never been there. I blinked, unsure if it was lingering fear or reality, and when I looked again, the figure was gone. My heart thudded, a quiet reminder that the night had left its mark, and the rules would remain, waiting for the next unsuspecting driver who dared to traverse these roads. The cab hummed beneath me, ordinary once more, yet I knew I would never see it, or the roads, the same way again. Each mile forward was measured, cautious, haunted, and though the sun climbed higher, piercing the remnants of fog and shadow, the unease lingered like a second skin. The rules had protected me, yes, but they had also taught me that in these parts, safety is temporary, and vigilance must never end. Even now, with the sun climbing slowly over the horizon and the open road stretching before me, I can't shake the sense that this was only the beginning. The rules I've learned tonight are not fixed. They are fluid, evolving in ways that I can barely anticipate. Each rule I followed, each commandment whispered by those who came before me, felt like a lifeline stretched taut over the darkness. But the darkness, it always finds a way to test you, to push you past the edge of what you understand. I know, from what I've seen and felt, that the next night will be different. The rules will multiply, twisting into new forms that might seem subtle at first, but each will carry consequences far more immediate, far more dangerous than I can yet imagine. I've seen enough to know that ignorance is fatal here. The landscape itself, the back roads, the fog, the shadows at the edge of my headlights, remains alive, observing, shifting in ways that defy explanation. So if you want to know the rest, If you want to understand what happens when these rules are broken, you'd better stick around. Because out here in rural Texas, the night is just getting started, and the road ahead is anything but safe. Every whisper, every movement at the periphery, every unseen figure is a reminder. Following the rules is not optional. Survival depends on it. And if you think this story ends with dawn, think again. There are nights I've yet to survive, nights where the rules will demand more than I've ever dared to give.